And lastly, Tracey Porteous. She's the Executive Director of BC Specialized Victim Assistance and Counselling Programs. She supports over 200 anti-violence programs across British Columbia and works with public authorities to develop policy and practice to enhance the safety of those vulnerable to sexual assault, relationship violence, and child abuse.
When I think about restorative justice, I think about the complexities in terms of looking at violence against women. And I think about caution. I also think about, quite fondly, the work that our organization did with the John Howard Society of BC a number of years ago. And we were, for a number of years, Willie Blondie and I were sort of debating the question about whether or not would restorative justice ever be appropriate in cases of violence against women. We developed a checklist for if we were to consider violence against women being used in a restorative justice process, what that would look like. And I have some copies of that today, so if after the panel, if anybody wants a copy of that, I have about 60 copies. I thought that that was a very radical idea for an offender-based organization and a victim-based organization to get together and basically agree on a number of principles. So it was a very exciting work. We know that every day in every city and every community that women are raped and brutalized and killed. Just in the last few years in BC, we've heard all too many deaths of women at the hands of domestic violence. And for women who are marginalized, Aboriginal women and immigrant women and refugee women and poor women and so forth, they are even more vulnerable to violence. So when I think about the potential to have any intervention with violence, we need to be considering that every case of domestic violence is a potential homicide. Women's mental health and well-being is seriously compromised. In fact, many of you probably know that the World Health Organization talks about violence as the #1 crisis facing women's health globally. Suicide, the compromised ability to have relationships, to mother children and therefore the next generation. Lots and lots of effects are quite serious. The Supreme Court of Canada in a number of cases has characterized sexual assault and other forms of violence as a hugely serious issue compromising dignity and equality for women. So I think that when we think about intervening, we need to be thinking about getting it right and being very careful about that. Violence against women is hugely underreported. Very few women come forward to report. And so having said that, what's key is for us to get it right when somebody does come forward so that if they are victimized again, they will come forward again. So I think that we have a number of concerns about the use of restorative justice, and I ask that you hear some of these concerns with an open heart, because I come here with an open heart knowing and hearing stories of restorative justice working in a number of different areas that have created healing in communities. So I think that I turn to the research when I think about what our challenges are, and some of the research tells us that there are problems like the lack of transcripts or no appeal processes, and other researchers have said that that it's important to look at victim satisfaction and to break down victim satisfaction specifically in cases of sexual assault and domestic violence and not just overall studies. Researchers point out that even though mediation and restorative processes are different, there's also a number of similarities, and there's a significant body of research from the United States and Australia and New Zealand that look at specifically the dangers of using mediation in cases of violence against women, where women have talked about feeling very vulnerable in the process and feeling that often offenders will utilize that process to further the victimization. Research tells us that compared to non-abused women, battered women felt that their ex-partners could out-talk them, had much more decision-making power, that the people that were brought to various mediations or tables were there weren't the supports that victims needed, and so forth. Mediators, research tells us, have been unable to deal with the ongoing issues of women reliving past childhood abuse, and it goes on. So I think what our challenges are, there are close to 400 programs in our province of victim service programs and counseling programs specifically set up to assist women and children that have been experiencing sexual assault and domestic violence. And I think that one of our challenges and our opportunities is for the restorative justice folks to really utilize the expertise that exists in our province amongst these 400 programs, because they're out there. If there's an interest in for you folks going down the road to look at restorative justice, there are a lot of professionals and experts in communities across BC that could join together with you and help looking at setting up that program so that it doesn't inadvertently re-victimize people or cause them to be unsafe. Thanks.